Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time the question comes to us from Frizz Big Maz, who asked, "Hey Thor, what do you think about Leslie Headland saying they are moving away from one of George Lucas's central ideas about the Force, and that she and the Acolyte are taking a different approach to defining what balance in the Force looks like? I know you already shared your thoughts about what balance means, but it looks like Disney is now creating canon that's the complete opposite. Article title is, Next Star Wars Showrunner Confirms Disney is Moving Away from One of George Lucas's Ideas, but original interview is for Total Film Magazine." Okay, so to be completely fair here, she technically didn't say those things. There is an article, the one you mentioned, and thanks for pointing it out, that says those things about something she had said. Not that what she did actually say doesn't, maybe raise a few eyebrows or lead to some questions. But I did find the original quote you and they, the article, are referring to, and here is what she said. "Honestly, the way I look at it is, there is no light without darkness, no good without bad. So to me, and this might just be a personal thing, the Force is about balance. It's not just a Marvel superpower. The Force sensitive aren't using telekinesis because they're special, powerful people. It's because they've achieved balance. As Yoda says, my ally is the Force." So the idea of a separation from that was really interesting. If you are unbalanced, the Force cannot protect you. Okay, so first of all, I agree with her about the Marvel superhero stuff. That is something I actually say all the time, that I don't want to see Star Wars turn into Marvel or Force users treated like superheroes. We are on the same page there, at least. The rest of it, however, well, she's not extremely clear about what she means. And granted, this is an interview where she's getting asked essentially random questions that she's trying to answer as concisely as possible and on the fly. It is not a long, well thought out mission statement that summarizes the themes she wants to explore in her series perfectly. That said, a lot of it sounds a little confusing or even like sort of mumbo jumbo she's saying because she thinks it sounds good and interesting, or philosophical even, in order to, get some people interested and intrigued enough to watch. And I'm not just trying to be mean or anything here. Again, these are concise, off-the-cuff answers, and I'm trying to be as fair as possible, and I would love to have her elaborate on what she means or why she seemingly thinks this way about the Force. But I would argue, and you can say I'm reading too much into this if you want, if I'm going to judge and interpret what she's saying, you can do the same to me. But she does seem to be, I would argue, kind of misunderstanding things, or what the scene she's sort of referring to or referencing is all about, or is trying to convey. And I'm talking about the one where Yoda says the Force is his ally, which he says to Luke in The Empire Strikes Back, right after Luke fails to get the X-Wing out of the mud, essentially. And I think that context is very, very important. Because after that failure, Yoda asks a discouraged Luke, who just complained the X-Wing was too big, if he judges him by his size. And Luke shakes his head, and that's when Yoda says, "And well, you should not, for my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is." And basically all I think Yoda is saying here is that the Force is this very powerful tool, though it's obviously far more than that. But it's this powerful thing that if you learn to believe in it, to side with it in a manner of speaking, to let it flow through you and all these other good things we've heard, to ally yourself with it, you could say, as Yoda even does, keeping in mind here he also had told Luke before he attempted to get the X-Wing out of the mud to try not, do or do not, there is no try. In other words, you're going to either believe in the Force and do this, or you're not going to fully believe and you're going to end up failing. There is no in-between. There is no half-assing stuff when it comes to using the Force. Anyway, he's telling Luke you got to fully get on board with the Force to become its ally in terms of being on the same page with it so you can use it to its full, powerful extent. Yoda is not saying, again in this context, that I'm on the same side as the Force like you're teammates with it or something, or have an actual alliance with it. Even though, yes, he of course, Yoda does serve the Force, don't get me wrong. But he's certainly not saying that here, in this context. And even if he was, it doesn't mean the Force is actually on his side or would protect him, which she seems to be implying. Now, sure, he can use it to protect himself, obviously, but so can Force-sensitive beings who are unbalanced. The Sith can certainly protect themselves with it, and they are the very epitome of being unbalanced, and can also do all sorts of other things with the Force, and that's because they bend it to their will. They don't treat it like an ally, to use her word again, rather they treat it more like a hostage. And it doesn't matter that they're not on the same side with it. It can be just as powerful for them as it is a Jedi because it's quicker and easier to, as a Sith, just use your anger, use your emotions, and to control your hostage, if you will. It's easier to do that than to be calm and rational and work together with your ally. Again, trying to use her kind of terminology here. And no, the Force doesn't kind of pick and choose who uses it the right way or not and reward those who do. You could say it just whispers its will into the ether through the midi-chlorians, and it's then up to the individual to listen to it or not. And if they don't, it's not like the Force can really do anything about it. They can't cut the Sith off from using it or anything, which is almost what it seems like she's trying to imply here when she says the Force cannot protect the unbalanced. I mean, the Force can't directly do virtually anything about them, even if the Sith completely ignore its will, which they of course do. They only care about their own will. And if the Force could just cut off their ability to use it on a whim, or stop them when they're not following its will, and stop protecting them, I guess, well, if that all were the case, Star Wars wouldn't exist, certainly not as it does now. It'd all be moot, because the Force would have almost total control and act more like a self-aware deity that picks and chooses its followers, rather than the nebulous energy field it is, one that doesn't seem to be fully cognizant and instead simply seeks to be in a state of balance, which the Jedi try to achieve and or maintain, the balance of the energy field made up of living, luminous beings that in turn also generates the Force, by listening to its will. Basically, the will of the Force is just this sort of intrinsic state the Force wishes to be in, again, a balanced one. And what the Jedi hear through the midi-chlorians is this sort of feeling or instinct that they can tap into that allows them to know what will help the Force be balanced. When they quiet their own mind, when they set aside their own will and ego, which the Sith fail to do, they can understand what needs to be done to bring balance. At least that's how I interpret it to work, based on things said in the movies and that Lucas has said outside of them. As for her saying there is no light without darkness, no good without bad, it's one of those things that sounds really fancy or profound, very philosophical, and like that's what Star Wars is all about. But I'd argue that's not what Star Wars is all about. Rather, I think it's much, much simpler than that. I made a video not long ago where I argued what balance in Star Wars can really be boiled down to, the easiest way to understand it, what the message Lucas is going for or was going for is, it's simply not taking more than you give or are willing to give. It's maintaining a balance between your selfless side and your selfish side, and that what being unbalanced is simply being too selfish, which Lucas himself has said.
The core of the Force. I mean, you got the dark side, the light side. One is selfless, one is selfish. And you want to keep them in balance. What happens when you go to the dark side is it goes out of balance, and then you get really selfish and you forget about everybody.
And so, though it sounds great to say you have to balance the dark with the light, or there's no good without evil, again, it all sounds very philosophical and great in concept or something interesting to explore, but I would ask what that looks like on a more practical or real world level. Why would you want to imply that is the lesson of Star Wars, that you should balance bad with good? And yeah, I know Star Wars is fictional, it's a fictional universe, and you can play by different rules in it. It doesn't have to be, and you could argue it shouldn't be, too much like the real world. But that said, would you ever argue that in the real world we need evil of some kind to understand what it means to be good? I mean, it's an interesting question, for sure, but I would argue that if we somehow magically lived in a perfect society where nobody ever wrongs another person in any way, shape, or form, and if we somehow had no knowledge of other societies like this current one, that weren't so perfect, where people do wrong each other as kind of this example of what not to do, well, I fully believe people would be able to realize or comprehend or conjure up ways that you could do bad things to other people, and the fact that they weren't doing them despite realizing they could, that they could steal, kill, or whatever, that would, in a sense, prove they understand they were wrong and evil to do, without ever having to actually experience them or see examples of them. Basically, the mere fact that a society avoids those things proves they understand those things to be wrong. You don't need actual evil to be committed in the world to know what is good. So why would Star Wars need evil or dark side users or anyone embracing the dark side to understand what is good and that the Jedi themselves are good. And it always baffles me, and I'm sorry if this is you, but it baffles me how many people think balance in Star Wars means equal number of Jedi to equal number of Sith. When balance is simply no Sith, no one doing evil and or overly selfish things. That is what brings balance. That is what brings harmony. And again, I know, or you could say, I'm reading way too much into a couple things she said in one interview, that I'm being nitpicky or whatever, and that is fair. But this is what I'm here to do. I'm here to talk some Star Wars. I love talking some Star Wars, especially when it comes to the nature of the Force, how it all works and why, good versus evil, how we can relate what it tries to teach us to the real world, which reminds me I should have another Sunday conversation up tomorrow, discussing a question I get asked all the time, that being, can there be too much light side, or what would that even look like? But anyway, this is what I love to do, and I think, or hope, that's why a lot of you are here, to get into what this all means, to discuss it, because I don't claim to be 100% right. I'm always up to be challenged and to have friendly debates about any of this or all of this, and I have learned so much from simply sitting back and listening or reading what other people have to say about Star Wars. But what I think it all comes down to, why I get so into this and why I care so much about Star Wars and why I want to tell my own stories to create my own truly shared universe like I talked about a while back, and yes, more about that really, really soon. But it's because I think Star Wars, or stories in general, they can be a tool for good. It can be a way to better understand morality, to teach it to people without just literally trying to explain to them why this is good and this is bad. It's a way for them to experience it, to come to their own conclusions about why something is right or wrong, through the actions and journey of others, even if that person or setting is completely fictional. Even if it's all made up, you can still understand why something in a story is right or wrong, good or bad, and why it would be wrong or right in the real world as well. And so the last thing I want to see done with Star Wars, as I said in the video just the other day, is it being used to justify the existence of evil. Which I'm not saying this comment proves the Acolyte will or anything like that, but not only should evil never be justified in story or elsewhere, but it especially shouldn't be justified in Star Wars, of all things. It shouldn't be making the argument some bad or evil is needed. That's ridiculous. We don't need a certain amount of crime to know that crime is bad. That is not balance. Allowing or justifying evil is the absence of balance. And it sure as hell isn't what Star Wars is trying to tell us. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below to agree or disagree with me, or just present your own opinions on what Leslie Headland had to say or about the Force, whatever you want to talk about. Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video, which I know many of you do, and I really wish I could get a chance to respond to more of them. I love doing this, but there is only so much time. Anyway, keep leaving those comments below, keep asking your questions, and let's keep talking some Star Wars. And so, until next time, thanks for watching.